It has always been understood that climate alarmists ignore clouds. They're far too difficult to model and they miss out of their mathematical models. In fact, a lot of the models even miss out water vapour, which is by far the largest greenhouse gas. And by the way, water vapour is invisible. Clouds are not water vapour. Clouds are droplets of water. The alarmists actually explain in some detail why the sun is not responsible for the recent climate change. For example, they argue that since 1970 there's been a reduction in the amount of solar radiation, whilst the temperatures have actually increased. They also argue with a high degree of confidence that the cosmic rays have no effect on cloud condensation nuclei, which form the low-level clouds. The basis of that argument is that the variations in solar radiation only amount to 1/100th of a watt per square metre on the Earth, and that is so small it can be ignored. In essence then, the alarmists claim the cosmic rays have no effect whatsoever on climate, and nor does the variation in solar radiation from the sun. But recent scientific work has blown apart all those alarmist claims. And this is what this video is about. Because that scientific work shows that the radiation from the sun and cosmic rays have a major effect on climate. Now you may consider that a lot of scientific gobbledygook, but don't worry, I'm going to put this in ordinary language and explain it all. What is solar wind or solar radiation? Same thing. It's actually the radiation coming from our sun, and this varies according to a sunspot cycle. When there is more radiation from the sun, we seem to have a lot of sunspots on the sun. These are dark patches, or appear to be dark patches. They are actually 10 times brighter than the moon, but just appear dark because of the surrounding brightness of the sun. When there are lots of sunspots, the sun gives out a lot more radiation, there's a lot more solar wind. And when the spots almost disappear and there's hardly any, there's much less radiation from the sun. These sunspots occur in 11-year cycles. They have been observed since the 17th century. These days we measure them with instruments, but then people simply counted the sunspots. But we've been able to reconstruct the sunspot cycle going back to that early date. The 11-year cycle by itself can't make that much difference, because over a long term, like 50 or 100 years for climate, you'll get many of them and they balance out. But the 11-year cycle is not the only cycle, as you can see from this graph. There are longer term cycles. Just look at this early period here, when it happened to be the mini ice age. So you can see that the 11-year cycles actually come in waves. So that is the basics of sunspot cycles. So let's now move on to cosmic rays, because they're different. Cosmic rays are produced by dying stars when they explode in these huge supernova explosions. And they are all over the universe. They vary depending how near you are to the latest supernova, etc. As we travel through space, our galaxy twirls and our Earth travels around that through space, we come across different areas of different amounts of cosmic rays. So there we are. We have solar winds and we have cosmic rays. Now let's proceed to explain really what happens and how these affect weather. And this is based on the latest research that has just come out. It shows that cosmic rays are about 200 times more powerful than previously thought. To understand all this, you have to understand the importance of low-level clouds. Low-level clouds reflect the sun's radiation. Imagine the whole Earth covered with low-level clouds. It may make you feel more comfortable underneath that blanket for a while, but the truth is that it reflects the sun's radiation, just like the polar ice caps do, and the Earth, as a result, cools. The heat just cannot get in. And the nuclei that form the droplets for these low-level clouds is actually from cosmic rays. But how is all this linked to solar wind? Cosmic rays are quite different. So what controls the cosmic rays? Well, what the new research has found is that the sun's radiation controls the amount of cosmic rays that make it through. When the sun is putting out a lot of radiation, such as the peak of the 11-year cycle, it actually blocks the cosmic rays making it through. And when the sun has low radiation, the cosmic rays make it through and cool the Earth by forming low-level clouds. This new research is from the University of Denmark and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and it confirms that cosmic rays create these low-level clouds. So returning to that long-term graph of solar radiation and looking at that low point in the 1600s, there is very low solar radiation. And what do we have? We have a painting from that period of skating on the River Thames. And they even erected market stalls on the ice. Now this is a graph that the IPCC published in 1990. They're publishing the same up to 1999 before the hockey stick came along and changed everything. And at that point they went back and changed all the historic temperature records so it would comply with the hockey stick. The alarmists do not accept there was a medieval warming period or even a little ice age. They state that these were just local weather events rather than worldwide global climate changes, but there is overwhelming historic evidence that totally refutes that. The Maunder minimum is a period when there was very, very little sunspot activity, and that seems to coincide with a little ice age. This graph is being constructed from carbon dating the solar activity going back just over 1,000 years. Here you can see the medieval warming period, and here you can see the little ice age. If you impose one graph on top of another, a temperature graph on top of the solar activity graph, you can see the approximate relationship of the two. Nobody, including myself, are claiming in any way that CO2 is not a greenhouse gas. It is. And greenhouse gas must have an influence on warming the climate. I totally accept that. The problem is that what they are claiming in the IPCC and the alarmist movement is that it's all down to man-made global warming by putting CO2 in the atmosphere, and it is not. The IPCC are only charged by the UN with looking at man-made global warming. So it is just assumed that all warming is caused by man, and this is absolutely ridiculous. This new research just kicks all that out. To put some perspective on where we are in the climate, this graph shows the last 500 million years of temperatures. And as you can see, most of the time it's been fairly hot. The blue part is when we're in glaciation periods and there are polar ice caps. And we're now in an interglacial period. That means we're between glaciations. The last one was just 22,000 years ago. Now take a look at the previous ice age here, when there were glaciation periods, down and up and down and up. Well, we've just entered that series now, and we live between the glaciations. Now it is generally agreed, even with the alarmists, that the reason for these huge fluctuations in temperature between ice ages and hot periods is because of what are known as the Milankovitch cycles. And these cycles are up to 100,000 years apart and are concerned with the distance of the Earth from the Sun, its angle, tilt and wobble. It will be very interesting to know if the climate alarmist community is simply going to walk away from this science. Frankly, while science is about a search for the truth on how the world works, what's happened is a whole industry has been built up. A person's ability to pay their mortgage has been built up on the climate alarmism. This work will shake their very foundations. And so they're not going to welcome this. And in fact, they held up publication of the paper for 2 years. I'm going to hand you over now to the lead professor responsible for this breakthrough after some 20 years' work.
And it's been published in Nature Scientific Reports. You must be pleased about that.
I'm pleased. I mean, we had a. It took almost 2 years to get it published, and we had a referee that couldn't reproduce any of our results, and it turned out that, and of course, if the referee says that he cannot reproduce any of your results, the editor will say no, thank you. But it turns out that the referee report was wrong, and we finally, after a long time, the referee admitted that he had made a mistake in his way of handling the data, and that he now was reproducing or could get the similar results as we had. And we knew that there had to be this mistake, because we have been very, very careful, and we have calculated these things a number of times by independent persons. I mean, you should also see it in contrast to the present day, or the latest IPCC report, where they say that the solar activity is more or less zero. So since 1750 until now, they claim that the consensus is that the sun has no effect whatsoever during the last 150 years or 250 years. If these things that we are looking at is true, then this cannot. It cannot be correct. The sun has also had a part of the heating that we have over the 20th century. And then, of course, now we have a small, we have a decrease in the solar activity, so you would actually also expect some cooling from this effect on the climate. So these are things that need to be understood in much more detail. But now we have a mechanism that seems to be working. In 2017, we found a final piece of this microphysical mechanism that links cosmic rays to aerosol formation and clouds. So we know that the ionization, which is produced by cosmic rays, is producing small aerosols. We know that the ionization, again from cosmic rays, is helping the growth of these aerosols, so they survive to cloud condensation nuclei. And you can say that these observations that we have now, it demonstrates that it actually is working in the real atmosphere. We see the effect in the real atmosphere, and we have a theoretical understanding of what's going on. So it looks quite consistent what we have now. I mean, if we look at the historical climate, if we go back 10,000 years, or the Little Ice Age and the medieval warm period, but we have many instances like this over the last 10,000 years, where you see beautiful correlations with solar activity. So it indicates that this mechanism has been operating throughout Earth's history. And I think that with this mechanism, we will be able to explain why there are these correlations.
Do you think the IPCC is going to take account of this in future reports?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it's very convenient not to have solar activity because they don't have a mechanism that can explain why solar activity should be important. So you can also see from the IPCC report where you have now a hockey stick type of temperature curve, that you don't really have any natural variability in the climate, and then all of a sudden we only have the anthropogenic effects on climate. And I think it's a big question whether this is true, because there are so many indications and studies that show that we have had a medieval warm period and a little ice age. And this would be a result of solar activity.
So
and
nature isn't as simple as the IPCC have been making out with just greenhouse gas forcing.
Yes, I mean they are only looking at greenhouse forcing, and that's very convenient because that's the only thing that they can really affect climate with their models. Yes. If you don't have a mechanism that can explain this, so we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm interested to see what happens because I mean I have now been in this field for more than 20 years. And we have slowly but surely sort of removed all the obstacles, and we can now see this beautiful mechanism operating. And I mean, what I'm not talking about today is when we see the correlations that we have on the really long time scales, so over millions of years, but we also see this. So it looks as if that we are on the verge of getting the mechanism that might have been the most important mechanism in the Earth's history with respect to changes in climate, and even its effect on life in general over these very long time scales. But this is something that will come out in the future.
And finally, where are you going with this in the near future?
It's a good question. My initial, I mean, now we have this result, and I'm working on these long time scales. I would like to work on the effect over the 20th century to see if we can get some results from doing modeling like everybody else, just to show that it makes actually a big difference. Yeah. My problem is that this work is very unpopular because it will mean. I mean, one implication could be that the effect of CO2, that is the climate sensitivity, must be smaller than what you get from climate models, because all of a sudden it's not just CO2 that is affecting climate, also solar activity. And if you have, I mean, and that's why it has been so unpopular over all these years. So my challenge is actually to survive in academia over the next years.
This professor and his colleagues deserve a Nobel Prize for their work. But in actual fact, they've had to struggle all the way through over the last 20 years. And it's so pleasing to see the conclusion that the work has now reached. Before the latest IPCC report, Science magazine, that's basically an alarmist magazine, and a number of climate alarmist scientists pointing out the models are running too hot. But it was ignored because it did not fit in with the political agenda of the IPCC, which is basically about the transfer of wealth from the Western developed nations to the undeveloped nations.